So for someone who's professed repeatedly that she hates sweet fragrances, it's kind of interesting that I ended up with a bottle of Dior's Féve Délicieuse, actually a discontinued fragrance from Dior's Privé line. This is known as a Tonka heavy fragrance, and I'm actually quite enjoying this despite not being into sweet fragrances. So I thought I would share why I added this to my collection and whether it's here to stay. Hello guys, welcome back. I'm Eloise. I hope everyone is doing great. So in today's video, we're talking about a discontinued fragrance. This one is from the house of Dior from their Privé line of fragrances. This is Féve Délicieuse, which is a pretty popular fragrance, or was a popular fragrance, and is known to be all about Tonka Bean. And it's also known to be a sweet fragrance. Something that I've said repeatedly on this channel, I'm not really into. I'm not into sweet fragrances, and I've sold so many of the sweet ones that I owned. But there is something different about this one that attracted me and made me go from a decant to not a full bottle, because I ended up with a partial. This is a partial 4.2 ounce bottle. So what I purchased in here is about 2.5 ounces. And I did start out with a decant. So I did test this out a whole bunch. And then when I got the opportunity to get a partial, I went for it. Like I said, it's a discontinued fragrance. So this was originally released in 2015. And then when Dior did some rebranding with the Privé exclusive line, I guess they rebranded in 2018, and there might be some level of reformulation here. So this bottle that I ended up purchasing based on the batch code is a 2021 release. So this would be after the reformulation or the rebranding of this fragrance. So I have absolutely no idea what this smelled like before 2018, the 2015 release. And the decant that I purchased is also not the original 2015 Féve Délicieuse. So I don't know what the original smells like. I don't know how it compares to this one. And I have to say, full disclaimer, even though I went from a decant to a partial bottle of this, I'm not sure that this is here to stay in my collection. There's something I like about it, and we'll talk more about it after we spray this on skin. There is something that I like about it, but then again, it's definitely a very sweet fragrance, and it's not the type of scent profile that I normally reach for, but there is something cozy about this, and there is something I like, particularly in the dry down. So let's spray it on skin, and we'll talk about what it smells like. So I have the dry down here on my right arm. I think I applied it about 2 hours ago. So it opens up really fresh. You get that citrus, and a lot of people talk about the lavender note in here. It's really obvious to my nose. It has a really fresh, musky opening. It's really nice. But it takes only minutes before you start to get the sweetness that comes through. This is all about Tonka. And Tonka Bean in fragrances is definitely a vanilla type of scent, but it's also very warm, and it can have some spiciness to it, like cinnamon, clove, and it can also give off facets that are like almondy and cherry-like and a little powdery. And this fragrance definitely does go powdery on my skin, but it opens up fresh, and I get that lavender, I get that muskiness, and I get that citrus. The bergamot comes through. It's pretty evident to my nose. And then as the sweetness comes through, it's almost a little boozy, and there are definitely chocolatey facets that I pick up, but it's almost a little boozy in the opening. The opening is quite strong. It really comes at you, but I feel like the fragrance sort of quiets down as it settles on the skin. It's still a syrupy, sweet fragrance. It's a gourmand, no doubt it's a gourmand, but it does have these chocolatey facets, and it has a warmth, as opposed to some of the sweet fragrances that are more sugary and that are definitely not the type of fragrances that I like. This one has a warmth to the sweetness, if that makes sense, but it's definitely gooey, and the sweetness is definitely prominent for a good amount of time when you're wearing this on skin. And I've worn this a whole bunch before making this video. I've worn it a whole bunch out of the decant, and I also wore it a few times after adding it to my collection. And while there's that chocolatey facet to the fragrance, I'm also getting the cherry almondy note. It's a big part of Féve Délicieuse. It's a little more cherry-like than it is almondy, but there is that, you know, the almond and the cherry sometimes are interchangeable in a fragrance. And I'm wondering if there's heliotrope in here that gives that powderiness. But the Tonka Bean itself is also powdery and can have the cherry almondy nuances. And I pick up on like a cinnamon sort of sparkle to the fragrance. I'm not sure if it's a note in here or if it's just part of that Tonka Bean. Tonka Bean has so many nice warm facets with spiciness. I didn't pay too much attention to the note breakdown because you have Fragrantica showing like a note breakdown for the 2015 release that I think is a little different from the 2018 release. So I don't even recall specifically what's listed. I know that they show cherry, but I'm not sure that cherry is an actual note in here. So is it heliotrope? I'm not sure, but it's something that's definitely cherry, almondy, powdery-like with these beautiful chocolatey facets. And it's definitely, like I said, a syrupy, gourmand fragrance. There's no doubt that it's a gourmand. But if there's any gourmands that I would ever consider wearing, this one would be it because of the way it dries down. Right now, it's still in the phase where it's sweet and you have that cherry almondy aspect that's still really, really prominent. But in the dry down on my right arm, it gets really ambery, and it's what I love about the fragrance. And what made me go from the sample to the bottle, even though it's discontinued, is the amberiness in the dry down, and I was getting wafts of it coming off my skin. And sometimes, or often, fragrances are really different when you're putting your nose to them, especially when I'm testing and I'm talking about them and I'm purposely putting my nose to the fragrance. It's really different from when you're wearing it and you get wafts. I don't know if you guys experience this, but sometimes when I have a fragrance or I'm testing a few different ones, I'm getting wafts of something that I'm really enjoying, and I'm almost not sure where it's coming from, because when I put my nose to the fragrance, I'm getting one experience, but then when it's wafting off the skin and I'm getting bits and pieces of it in the air, I'm enjoying it much, much more, to the point that I don't recognize whether the fragrance is the one that I sprayed and had my nose in repeatedly, because coming off the skin is such a different experience. So this one, I think, is one of those fragrances where, yes, it's definitely a gourmand. I'm not trying to downplay the fact that this is a sweet gourmand fragrance. A lot of people that love the Dior Privé line of fragrances give this one big thumbs down as being just too sweet. This one, tobacco color, and there's the other one, Vanilla Diorama, that I almost purchased a decant of. But if they're going to be sweet fragrances, I'm not really too interested. But I do have tobacco color. Is that the way you say it? I do have that one on the way. So I'll be speaking about that fragrance as well, which is supposed to be an ultra sweet honey fragrance with an overdose of honey with tobacco. So I'm really curious to see if the tobacco in that fragrance is like a delicate tobacco leaf, or I heard that it's actually a smoky tobacco that has some sort of punchiness to it, but I also heard that there's an overdose of honey. So Féve Délicieuse gets lumped into that sort of trio of sweet fragrances in this Dior Privé line, which makes it interesting that I would ever add something like this to my collection, I guess. But like I said, in the dry down, I really love how the amber part of this fragrance, I would say, takes over, so that you're left with a powdery fragrance. I'm picking up on the benzoin, and I'm a big fan of that ambery benzoin aspect in fragrances. I really enjoy that, and you still get hints of that cherry, and you still get hints of the fact that it's a gourmand sort of sweet fragrance, but it's really not as sweet in the dry down. It's powdery, it's ambery, and it does retain some of those cherry-like sweet facets, but it's warm. To me, this is never a super sugary fragrance. And even though I'm not sure if this is here to stay, I want fragrances that I'm going to use and enjoy, and I'll sort of see how it goes, see whether or not I reach for this. I don't collect fragrances just as statement pieces. I want to wear them, I want to enjoy them. It's hard to get to all the bottles that I own, but I definitely want to enjoy something I'm wearing. So obviously I enjoyed the decant of this because I did go from a decant to a bottle. And if there is going to be a gourmand in my collection, it's going to be one that centers around Tonka Bean. Now, speaking of Tonka, this fragrance was spoken a lot about in connection with Guerlain's Tonka Imperiale, which is also a discontinued fragrance, which I have a little decant of, and I have it on my right wrist. I did want to compare it, and I feel like Tonka Imperiale is a completely different type of fragrance, and it's really, really nice, and I might like it a bit more than Féve Délicieuse, but Féve Délicieuse is more about the Tonka than Tonka Imperiale is. Tonka Imperiale, to my nose, is really aromatic, and I feel like the Tonka aspect of that fragrance doesn't have the facets that Féve Délicieuse has in terms of the chocolatiness and the warmth and that cherry almondy sort of aspect. I feel like Féve Délicieuse has an overdose of the Tonka, while Tonka Imperiale, as it dried down, almost came off a little bit vanillic and a little bit reminiscent of some of the other vanillas in the house of Guerlain, the Lac de la Matière line of fragrances. So it was reminding me a little bit of Spiritus Double Vanille, that sort of vanilla. I feel like in Féve Délicieuse, the Tonka is a Tonka. Yes, it's combined with other notes, and it's a gourmand, and it's syrupy, heavy. Is there a caramel note in here? A lot of people talk about this being sort of caramel heavy as well. I don't think caramel when I smell this, because I get so much of that nuttiness, and I get the cherry and that chocolatiness. So I'm not sure that caramel is what comes to mind, but you guys can let me know in the comments what you think of this fragrance. And I do think that the Guerlain Tonka Imperiale is a much, much, much more subdued fragrance. It's really pretty, but it's definitely more subdued than Féve Délicieuse. This one is really big and bold, and Tonka Imperiale is more delicate. I guess it sort of goes along with the other fragrances that are vanilla-centric in that line of Guerlain's fragrances. So those are my thoughts on this fairly new addition to my collection. If you guys are familiar with this fragrance, let me know what you guys think. If you think that it's a great Tonka Bean fragrance, or if there are other Tonka Bean fragrances that you prefer. And if you've gotten your nose on Tonka Imperiale from Guerlain, what you think about that one. Both being discontinued fragrances, so I don't know, maybe they weren't selling and doing very well. But those are my thoughts, and as always, thank you so much for watching, your support, and for your comments. Until next time, bye guys.